Hello, class, and welcome to week 10. Before we get started, I would like to just say that I hope all of you are well and that your families are well. And this, hopefully, we're all doing well in this very difficult time in the lives of all of us. I also encourage you, if you have questions, to be sure to stay in contact with me, calling me on my cell phone or leaving a text message or leaving me a email. So use any of those methods. Let's stay in touch. From what I gathering from your assignments and some feedback from some of you, I know that we're continuing on with the course. Seems to be moving right along, and here we are in week 12. So in week 12, our main topic is to talk about handling objections. And there's the famous seven-step selling process that you've seen so many times. We see that objections is there in the fifth step following the presentation. Objections are those hesitations or concerns that a prospect might have about the product or the purchasing process. But I want to, I'd like to point out that the word objection may be, in many cases, it may be a little bit too harsh in a sense that they certainly are objections on the part of the prospect and the prospective customer, but at the same time, it's the first time that it's the other half of the conversation that we've been having with the customers. In step 4, we were the salespeople. We made the sales call. We offered a solution to the prospect. In step 5 is sort of getting the feedback from the prospects about, well, did we hit the target with what their pain point was? Did we solve their problem? And so those hesitations or concerns are not always huge obstacles. They are more so questions that we need to answer. You've had a chance by the time you're reviewing these slides, to have looked at the objections in various ways. The author of the textbook has presented objections in pretty much the typical standard way that you would expect the selling process to be explained. Another part, and some other authors and some other writers might have used a little different approach, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Just another slant, another way of looking at handling objections. People basically, customers in particular, instinctively resist ways of being, and most of us, let's look at our role as customers. We don't like being pushed into things. So if the presentation in step 4 was too pushy, we may feel some pushback from the customers, some resistance. So what I'm going to be talking about here in both this section of slides in part 1 of handling objections, and then there's a second section, part 2. I decided to break this up into 2 sections to talk about handling objections. I'm going to be looking at it from a standpoint of not so much pushing more information on the prospect, or being able to answer more questions, or to provide more data or more information or more reasons why they should buy our product or service. But I'm going to be approaching it from the standpoint of looking at what obstacles are in their way. Perhaps some of those obstacles are things that we as the salespeople have created, or some of them are things in the background and in the minds of the prospects. So what I'm going to be talking about in this section of topic 1 and topic 2, it's about removing some of those obstacles, identifying the obstacles, and then removing them. But as we think about objections, we also need to think that objections are also there are barriers to making a sale. At least that's the first thing we think about. But I think, as the textbook points out, that it's really more than that. An objection is really a way to, it's a question or hesitancy about the product. An objection might merely be the fact that the customer, the prospective customer, is asking for more information. They didn't quite get it when we made a presentation. Maybe our presentation had some holes in it, and we didn't do as good a job in the presentation. So now we're trying to clear up things and provide some clarity and maybe remove some obstacles, whether we created them or whether they were created in the minds of the customer, or maybe created by the customer's company if this is a business-to-business transaction. An objection can be an opportunity. It's a time when the salesperson listens and understands, trying to get a feel for why the prospect isn't interested or what the questions are. When a prospect objects, it can also be a way for us, if we do it in the proper way, we can build trust with that prospect. But keep in mind that if we're still talking, if we're still in a conversation with the customer, then the objection must not have been too difficult. Otherwise, they may have said, okay, I'm done with this conversation. I'm not interested in your product. The fact that we're still talking at stage 5 is a good sign, and so we want to make the best use of that. Some of the objections, some typical ones that we'll talk about, is that certainly an objection is a statement of risk by the prospect, and it's also an opportunity for the salesperson. It signals a level of interest. They wouldn't still be talking with us if they weren't still interested. It alerts us, alerts you as a salesperson as to what you need to do next to bring the sale to a successful conclusion. It gives you more opportunities to build your relationship. It may give you an opportunity to provide a different set of products or a different set of services or some add-on services. It may be that in our presentation, and again, I'm saying that you and me and we, when I'm saying that, we are the salespeople, where that's a perspective I'm talking from. We may have misunderstood what the actual need was on the part of the consumer, and so now this gives us a chance to come in and fix those things. It'll also give us a chance to find the true reason for resistance, if there is such a thing, and it will help us determine how to lower the risk, at least the risk of purchase on the part of the consumer. Anytime when we are consumers, you have to think of the time that you're a consumer and you see a lot of risk in the transaction. It may be because the product is something that's unfamiliar to you, the price is out of line, you feel a little bit nervous about making the purchase. The perfect answer there on the part of the salesperson is to lower that risk by answering questions or removing some of that risk. Typical ones are, since they're on the slide there, I'll just mention those, that the price is not competitive. The customer is telling us the price is not competitive. In a business-to-business transaction, it might be, we're not sure you can handle our type of installation. You might be a small provider of computer services. You might be a small company providing software to dental offices. And I'm thinking back to last week's assignment and last week's slides where we had the example of the dental office. Think in terms of a chain of dental offices, of which now there are many chains, national chains, and as you know from some of the TV advertising that you see, that dental practices still exist operated by independent dentists, but we're also seeing a trend toward chains of dental office practices. And it could be that while the software that our company provides is suitable for the one or two dentist office, it might not be for a larger company. It might be that there's nothing wrong with what's going on with the current supplier to the customer. They're happy with that current supplier. So in that case, these are very typical kinds of objections. Going back to the 7-step selling process, I want to kind of call your attention to the fact that when we're talking about step 4 and step 5, you can think of it in terms of step 4 being we as a salespeople making a presentation, and the handling objections when something hesitations or concerns are mentioned. That is the customer answering back. So steps 4 and 5, if you'll remember, you didn't. This is in your textbook. This traditional communication model. We didn't cover that this semester because most of you have had a course in communication. Something like this particular model would have been typically discussed. This is a very generic model that's called the traditional communication model. So it's a matter of looking at the sender of a message and a receiver at the other end. And what I'm suggesting here is that the sender is the seller in step 4 making a presentation. The receiver is step 5. That's the customer now answering back in that feedback response loop to give feedback back to the sender, back to the seller. And actually by going through this process and by going back to looking at the steps in the selling process, steps 4 and 5 are really parts of the communication model. There's a sender, there's a receiver. That process keeps looping, keeps going forward. The sender keeps sending a message. The channel in this particular case is face-to-face in the example that we used, at least in the dentist office. And most of the time when we're talking about personal selling, the channel is a one-to-one, face-to-face channel of communication. It's one person talking to another person. Then the receiver answers back, and the sender then may answer that back. And so we have that complete. We've completed that feedback loop. So in that respect, I think we can say that objections and discussing objections is very much a natural part of the communication in the selling process. One of the things that I'd like to refer back to when I saw this particular slide for our chapter 12, it's to think back to the discussion of the word meanings, how people interpret meanings. Meanings are not so much in words as they are in people. It's how we interpret those words, and I'm thinking back to some of the discussion we have about David Ogilvy, for example, last week, in last week's slide package that we talked about word meanings and speaking the language, understanding the specific professional language that's used in the customer's businesses. And we need to be with any customer, whether it's specific language to the business or just general discussion with the customer, we need to be less general and more specific. In that communication process to complete that loop, we'll have more talking directly to the customer. We'll have fewer questions on their part, fewer frowns on their faces showing they don't understand. If we can be, rather than saying, I'll get back to you shortly, is be very specific. I'll get back to you by Tuesday. Be very specific about how we leave things. The more specific we can be in that face-to-face communication, more likely the better that communication will be, and the better and more certain our relationship building will be with that customer. It will take only a few minutes. Really, if it'll take less than 5 minutes, go ahead and say it that way. Many times, as you know, when somebody says this will only take you a few minutes, sometimes that doesn't. It actually means it's going to take more than a few minutes. At least I've interpreted that with some of the people that that I talk to and I've used to work with and have done business with, that when they say I will only take a few minutes, and particularly if it's from a salesperson like you are and we are in the examples that we're talking about here, it's better just to say, if it's only going to be 5 minutes, say it that way. Say 5 minutes. The installation, it will cost about $5,000 plus installation. Again, if you're talking about an objection, now you're to the point where the customer is interested. They're interested in the product. Think back to the dental office example from last week. The dentist is interested in the product. So let's be specific about the price, because that's where they're thinking. Why don't we think that way? Instead of saying it'll cost about something, give the exact cost. So now we're down to maybe getting close to closing the sale, and the buyer is going to write the check. Let's say it's going to cost $4,800 and $200 for installation, and that will help move us from the objection process into the next step, which is closing the sale. This is a restaurant example, and I know many of you have had experience in the restaurant business, and rather than saying something like everything is included, the specific statement that you were probably taught by your managers in your food service businesses is to say that it includes the entree, the vegetable, the dessert, the coffee. That's just a really nice, and I think that's a good line to think about. No matter what products you're selling, it's because when you're in a restaurant, that's the way you would want to hear it, rather than everything is included. Well, what is everything? Well, there it is, and be very, very specific about that. Some other things, still thinking about word meanings, and the word meaning and assumptions about words can be, we can be wrong about that so many times. And this was a quote from your textbook, that nearly 75% of communications that are received are interpreted incorrectly. They're misheard, they're misunderstood. This occurs because people tend to assume that they know what other people mean, or people assume that others know what they mean. And think back to times when you've had a conversation with somebody, and after a few minutes, you realize, we've been talking for 5 minutes, and I think we've been using the wrong terms. We haven't really understood each other. There's been something missing in terms of the meaning. Either I misunderstood you, you misunderstood me. That's what we, fortunately, in the face-to-face selling situation, that when we're communicating with our prospects face to face, that we're able to fix those problems and correct those word meanings and correct that understanding. People sometimes tend to hear what they want to hear. They hear what they hear, and they misunderstand it. So let's keep in mind, particularly, I know I said this last week when we talked about the presentation. Now I'm saying it in terms of when we're talking about the objections. It's getting more important now in the objection phase, because now we're down to more specific questions. We're down to dialogue with the customer, and so let's make sure there's clear understanding. This is very, very important. We talked about how important listening skills are, and we talked about mentioned those last week. But now they're more important this time when we're talking about objections, because we are doing less of the talking, and we are now hearing the words of the prospect, and we have to make sure we understand those and give a clear answer in response to that. That's kind of some background for this process of looking at removing barriers. So we're now from the rest of this particular set of slides, as well as the topic 2 set of slides, that we're talking about barriers to come up in making the sale, barriers that we face after we've made the presentation. And we're saying that these barriers are basically the objections. And so there are five main categories that we're going to talk about. And we'll talk about the first two of those, reducing reactance and easing endowment. We're going to talk about those here with topic 1 slide package. And then in topic 2 for today, it's going to be the next three there: shrinking the distance, alleviating uncertainty, and finding supportive evidence. Again, kind of as a reminder, this is looking at the objections. It's looking at what you've already studied in the textbook as being what I would say at the sort of at the micro level. The textbook is very specific in terms of handling objections, through email and phone calls and face-to-face and some of the wording. And that's the handling objections from the detail point of view. These barriers are looking at it from more of from the big picture. It might be looking at it, from as you step back, that the barriers are, as we're talking about now, these 5 barriers are more of stepping back from the buying and selling process and looking at the forest as a forest, whereas the textbook is giving you the details, which would be looking at the individual trees rather than the forest as a whole. So kind of keep that in mind, that between our discussion here in topics 1 and topics 2 slides, you'll get the big picture, and then you get the close-up picture in the textbook discussion. So some of the words and some of the terminology might be familiar to you, some of it might not be, some of it might be words that are used in a different way than you've run into in the past. But this discussion, much of this terminology is drawn from sociology and psychology, and it fits really well with what we're talking about, because it's when we're talking about dealing with buyers, we're talking about the psychology of consumers, and you've all had a course in basic marketing, and so you've read a lot and studied about and talked a lot about consumer behavior, and that's very much a psychological and a sociological kind of a process. But a couple of things just as a clue before we get into the first two in this slide package is the topic of reactance. And when we say reducing reactance, that what we're going to do is to help people feel they're in control. When we're dealing with a customer, and you can think of this at the time that you've been a customer and you felt uncomfortable because of the way the sales process is going. Maybe you felt comfortable because you felt you were losing control. This was going to cost you money. Somebody was pushing information on you. They're pushing a product on you, and clearly you felt out of control. You had a very uneasy feeling. And some people have that in every sales trend. Every time they buy something, they have that. And so it's a matter of we know that's an issue. Even when you want to buy something, this isn't. We're not necessarily talking about something that the salesperson is trying to make you buy something you don't want. This is something you really. You're interested in this. Maybe it's a high ticket item. Oftentimes it is, and it's a way that but in every situation you feel, as soon as you feel you're not in control of it, you're ready to cancel the sale. You're ready to press the stop button. So we're going to talk about that one. The other one is there are many. It's called easing endowment, and endowment means that a person prefers the status quo. It's like, okay, well, I see the product, I see what you have. This applies to business transactions as well. A business has the dentist office. The dentist office has a software package. It's been working. what's the problem? Well, let's just continue. Let's just continue with what we have, and if it, maybe if it breaks, maybe it stops working, then we might consider something new. But so those first two things, those first two items we're going to look at, these first two barriers. So reactance is a desire to maintain our freedom, behavioral freedom. Psychological reactance is the state resulting from the response to threats to our behavioral freedom. Two types of threats can lead to reactance: social threats, external, pressure from other people to induce us to do something, or impersonal things, things that restrict our ability to buy a particular product or service. Usually, you would associate this with a pushy salesperson, or you may look at it may be in effect something like scarcity effects. Scarce products are valued more. That is sort of, you can get a little bit of a additional insight into that with what's going on with product outages in many of the stores, right now as we go through the coronavirus epidemic. And what we're dealing with in the stores, as you're well aware, that there is a scarcity of some products, and so that may be one of the motivational factors, that people feel their freedom is being limited because the products are not available. So they're trying to make up for that by finding products where they can. Some of the other, so that's reactance. We overcome reactance by rather than offering just one solution. One possibility is to share multiple solutions. An example there would be in the dental office example from last week, we had I think when we talked about, at least in my mind, when we were talking about the presentation, it was a matter of offering a solution to the dentist office. It was the software package that our company has to offer. When there is only one solution, when you're offering one solution to a buyer, you're kind of putting them in a position of saying, kind of like take it or leave it. Here's our product. This is what I think is going to solve your problem. Here's what it costs. What do you think? Let's close the sale. Okay. That's sort of where that kind of discussion is going. And in realizing that maybe in all of these 5 psychological factors that we're going to be talking about, reactance is one, okay, endowment is the other one, and then there are 3 others that we're going to talk about in the other slides. Think about all these that exist in all buyers, even us, when we're buying, to some extent. It may not be to a great extent, but depending on the person, it'll be more in some people than in others. But just as a person, as you are studying the sales process, think of this as being these factors exist in people to some extent. Some factors may be, somebody might score high. They may have concerns about all these factors. Others may only be in a sense created, barriers in their minds might only be created by 1 or 2 of them. But anyway, this is the way I'd like for you to think about it. Think about it that they exist in people to some extent, greater in some people, lesser in other people. So rather than offering one solution, this is where we might share, when you're asking the person, then the buyer, to mull over in their mind whether they want this one solution, this one product that we're offering. Offer them multiple options, multiple solutions. That is, well, you can say, okay, well, what we have is, I have this software package, and you remember last week we said the software package consisted of actually 2 packages. Part of it was to manage the business, take care of the billing, the appointments, like the accounting functions, the bookkeeping functions. And then there was another software package that interfaced with the the dental office X-ray equipment and took the images and stored the images and kind of used it from the dental health side of it. So instead of just offering both of these pieces of software as one solution, it might be share multiple solutions. You can say, okay, Dr. A, what I'd like to consider is right now, why don't you pick one of these and we'll install it, and you can get going operating using this in your operations in your office. And then when you're comfortable and the office staff feels comfortable with how that's working, we'll install the second package. So give them more. Dr. A, you only have to buy one of these. There's two packages. You only have to buy one or the other. You don't have to buy both of them right now. Why don't you go ahead and why don't we set you up to buy one of these, and we'll if you like this, the other one will be another purchase. So give them some things to think about. So rather than what the psychology of this is, rather than the buyer trying to think of just that one decision, thinking there's only one solution, the buyer is now thinking, well, which of these two do I want? Their thinking is more on, you've almost made a sale, but you don't know which package yet. You kind of get my drift on that. They're thinking about which, should I have two? Should I buy one? Should I buy the second one? Should I buy both? It gives them some other things to think about, and it actually is moving them closer to the buy-in. Another thing would be, another approach that's often mentioned is that it's to highlight the gap between what the prospect would recommend to others and what they themselves prefer for themselves. I'll give you an example, sticking with the dental office example, is it would be here this is part of the conversation with the dentist, and you're still in the meeting, you've made the presentation, now you're listening to some objections, okay? So part of that discussion is that, well, Dr. A, what would you, if you had a friend who's a dentist going into business or replacing their software product, which one would you recommend that they use? So you're actually, again, you're thinking, so now Dr. A is thinking, okay, well, which one would I recommend? And in a sense, that's one way of deciding what they might prefer for themselves. They might say, well, I would recommend the package of office management because maybe that's what a new dentist, that's what offices are having the most difficulty with now, kind of keeping track of patients, keeping track of dental insurance claims, keeping track of appointments. And so that brings, by highlighting the gap between what the prospect might recommend to others and what they themselves prefer for themselves, in a sense, as they are discussing what they prefer, what they would recommend, they hear themselves, in a sense, recommending that choice to themselves. That's kind of what that particular discussion is about. The other in this slide package we're going to look at is endowment. The concept of endowment. Endowment describes when somebody places a higher value on something they own simply because they own it. The difference in value happens because the individual possesses the item and feels comfortable with it. It's about maintaining the status quo also. It's like, well, what I have is working and it's fine, and so I don't really need to make another purchase. But you think about this, a lot of examples of oftentimes it comes up when people particularly sell their private home, they will put a higher value on it because they possessed it. They may think that, well, they may tell the real estate agent, well, these comparable figures that you've quoted about what these houses are selling for in this neighborhood, those are low because my house has more going for it. But we all think that way. So again, that's one of those factors, that the difference in value. We think that things that we possess, we put more we tend to put more value on that. One of the issues there is the idea of the solution is to ease endowment, to ease it, to help them back off from that fact. And one of them is help the prospect understand that sticking with the status quo isn't as cost-free as it seems. There's a number of examples there. One of them that I read in another description of this of how to ease the endowment process had to do with a salesperson in the selling personal financial products, selling stocks and bonds and insurance products and so forth. But in a sense of a person having a sum of money that they were keeping in a large in a personal savings account in a bank that paid a very small amount of interest, and the financial planner was just encouraging the person to put it in something better that may pay a little bit more, a certificate of deposit, or perhaps a money market fund, or some other financial instrument that would pay a little bit more interest than an ordinary bank account, which was paying little or no interest. So that particular example, kind of the rest of that story is the financial planner recommended that ask the customer, well, could I touch bases with you every month and kind of see how you're going and see if you have any interest in maybe investing those savings account dollars in something that might pay a little bit more interest. And the customer said, sure, yeah, that's no problem. Let's talk every month. And so every month the financial planner would contact the person and say, how you going? It's been a month since we talked. And, and by the way, if you would have had your money if you would have had that money not in the bank account that you have, but in a certificate of deposit, you may have earned, this much more. And so the customer said, well, that sounds kind of interesting, but, I'll talk to you next month. And so next month, so maybe after a couple of months of this discussion, the person said, maybe it's worth it. Maybe it is, maybe I should just, make a change there. And instead of the status quo of maintaining that status quo of keeping my money in a bank where I've always kept it, of maybe stepping up and putting it into another where I'd make it just a little bit more money. So that is helping people understand that there is a cost involved with keeping things as they are. In the dentist office example, so let's assume that Dr. A decided at least to buy the office management software package. That it's not as the fact that maybe the current software isn't quite as good at keeping track of expenses, keeping track of bookkeeping information, of keeping track of customer payments and customer health insurance or dental insurance claims. And so that is after the dentist to see there's a cost involved in losing some of that money falling between the cracks, that the old or the current system, the status quo office management system, is allowing some dollars to fall between the cracks, that it isn't cost-free. Not making a change isn't a cost-free type of decision.